Thank you all very much for coming. I believe this should be a very interesting conference. As you may know, the Patriots for Europe Foundation is the only party foundation that is ready to challenge the ideas and dogmas of the Brussels mainstream. Through our events, we want to make the voice of millions of Europeans heard, whom elites in Brussels refuse to listen to. The topic of today's conference is no different. We need to talk about the consequences of Ukraine joining the EU or Ukraine potentially joining the EU. Ukraine is one of the largest countries in the world. Since the Russian invasion in 2022, it has become a war-torn country. More than 1 million people are dead. Cities have been razed to the ground. Several million people have fled their homes. The war is still raging, and EU leaders refuse to even try diplomacy in order to restore peace in Europe. Instead, the prevailing policy among EU institutions is to grant Ukraine a speedy enlargement process and EU membership. The principle of merit-based membership seems to be thrown out the window. But here's another idea. There can be no shortcuts when it comes to EU membership. And Ukraine is not ready, and everyone knows that. Even people in the European Commission know that. Ukraine's EU membership, under such circumstances, would put huge pressure on European farmers, on the European budget, on the European economy, and the well-being of Europeans. Therefore, it is a fair question to ask. Did anyone do the math? Did anyone calculate the costs of Ukraine's EU membership? Because Europeans deserve to know what Ukraine's EU membership would cost, what it would cost for all of us. This is a taboo in Brussels. This is a taboo we are breaking here today in the European Parliament. I am proud to say that we have speakers today who have done the calculations, who have done the math. And just in time for our discussion, a fresh EU barometer was also published that further underlines that Europeans are divided on Ukraine's EU membership. Unfortunately, I don't expect this to spark honest discussions at top levels, unfortunately, in the Council or here in the European Parliament. We will hear from several distinguished speakers today. French MEP Gilles Pennelle, thank you for coming. Czech MEP Tomas Kubín. Danish member of European Parliament and whip for the Patriots for Europe group, András Vistisen. As well as two experts from Poland and Hungary, Mr. Soma Lehotzky and Mr. Kacper, who have also accepted our invitation. Thank you for coming. And without further ado, I would also like to just thank all of you for coming. I see several members of European Parliament are here. I believe this is a hot topic as the fall session of the European Parliament begins. So let's get into it. I give over the floor to Raphael, our director of the foundation.
Thank you very much, András, and thank you for all of you for being here. We will today's discussion will be divided in two parts. For the first part, we'll speak about how the integration of Ukraine in the European Union will have a cost on the European budget, how it will be a burden for the European budget. And after that, we'll have a focus on agriculture and see how the risk of open markets with Ukraine and how it will endanger European agriculture and European farmers. For the first part, dedicated to the cost on the European budget, we'll have the opportunity to have two speakers. First of all, András Vistisen, member of European Parliament for the Danish People's Party, will speak about the effect of this integration on the EU budget and more specifically on the effect of the net contribution of northern and western countries. And after that, we'll have the opportunity to hear Mr. Soma Lehotzky. He's the head of research at the Századvég Foundation Center for Research and Economic Trends, which is an Hungarian think tank, and we will speak about the impact on cohesion policy and structural funds for the central and especially for the central and Eastern European countries. So first of all, Mr. Vistisen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, patriots. Let us begin with a simple thought experiment. Imagine a country applying for EU membership where the following is true. The courts are not independent. Corruption runs deep through police, customs and government agencies. Organized crime flourishes and maintains ties to the state. National and sexual minorities are openly discriminated against and in some cases brutalized by the state. The average salary is 3 to 4 times lower than the poorest current EU member state, and a country that is in an active war and have lost control over main parts of its territory. Now ask yourself, would any serious person recommend this country for full EU membership tomorrow? Of course not. And yet, when that country is Ukraine, suddenly facts do not matter anymore. Suddenly, the same politicians who lectures on values, human rights, and rule of law become deaf, blind, and mute. But EU membership is not an act of charity. It is a political binding contract, and the consequences of ignoring these basic truths could become catastrophic, not only to the EU, but also for Ukraine. Rapid Ukrainian membership of the EU has become an obsession for the EU elite, the Commission, the Parliament majority, and several of the member states' national governments, and it doesn't matter what the consequences will be. They call it moral leadership. I call it a suicidal miscalculation. So let's begin to talk about the facts that the European elite refuse to acknowledge: the financial cost. The Council of the European Union have commissioned an internal analysis of the budgetary impact of Ukrainian membership to the EU. And here is what the EU's own institution found. Ukraine would overnight become the largest recipient of EU funds in all of European history. Let's explain why. The two largest part of the EU budget is, as many knows, the European Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, and the Cohesion and Regional Development Funds. Combined, these two programs stands for more than 2 out of 3 euros spent within the budget. Ukraine will, if it becomes member of the European Union, be receiving 30% of the CAP for Ukraine alone, and 16% of the cohesion funds for Ukraine. That's a total of 157.5 billion euros in the first budget period alone. But even with this colossal charge to the EU budget, it's not nearly enough to fund and finance Ukraine's membership. The budget itself will have to be supersized to accommodate Ukraine. The Council estimate themselves that the budget must be increased by 21 to 24%. According to another study done by the Institute for German Science, Ukraine's membership of the European Union would need the budget to be increased by 180 billion euros. And who will pay? Not Brussels, not the Commission, not the Parliament, but our citizens, our businesses, our taxpayers. EU membership was once sold as a win-win for candidate countries. You have to contribute and then you can benefit. Now that deal will be breaking down. Ukrainian membership means that EU member states, for the vast majority of them, the membership will be a cost, not a benefit. And that's not only Western Europe, where we are already huge net contributors like Denmark, Germany, or other countries in that region. This means that countries like the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Cyprus, and even Malta will have to go from being net recipients to net contributors to the European budget. Let's put it very simple. The member states will have to pay more and receive a lot less. But the budget burden can't stand alone when we assess the consequence of Ukrainian membership. Other factors must also be addressed. So let's begin with the basic requirement of EU accession, the rule of law. Ukraine currently ranks 104th in the world when it comes to Transparency International's corruption index. That's far worse than any EU member country and most of the EU candidate countries that have been stuck in the waiting room for enlargement for decades. Corruption is not an abstract issue in Ukraine. It is systemic. The judiciary is not independent. Court decisions can be bought. Public procurement is riddled with nepotism. And this is not my opinion or the Patriots saying this. No, this is the EU's own progress report on Ukraine. Ask yourself, how can a country that cannot uphold its own law be held accountable for upholding EU's legislation? If we move on to organized crime, a topic most people in Brussels doesn't like to talk about in Ukraine, and look at Europol's 2024 report, Ukraine is the key source for illegal firearms and human trafficking in Europe. Criminal networks in Ukraine have route to drug smuggling, money laundering, and cyber crime. If we look at an area like wages and migration, Ukraine has a population of 35 million people and a monthly average wage of under 400 euros. When freedom of movement begins, European labor markets will be flooded with low-cost labor migration. It will hit local workers, it will underline collective agreements, and it will increase resentment. And Brussels elites will probably act surprised. But it's going to be the same working class who will suffer from this. It's going to be social dumping and welfare tourism on steroids. And if we have to end somewhere, let's do it with the blatant double standards of those here in Europe who preaches human rights, minority protections, and anti-discrimination. Let me just remind you of one horrifying event. In 2024, a young man from the Hungarian minority in Ukraine was beaten to death by military officers after refusing Ukrainian conscription. This is not a rumor of fake news. This is something that has been verified by official channels and been publicized in both Ukrainian and European media. But to this day, no one has been held accountable. Now imagine if that had happened in Budapest or Warsaw. The European Commission would have stood there the next day demanding sanctions, but it happened in Ukraine, and therefore all we have heard is silence. Ukraine has also repeatedly restricted the linguistic rights of ethnic minorities in the country, such as the Hungarian minority, the Romanian minority. That's a clear violation of the Council of Europe recommendations. And for all the people here in Europe who are very concerned about the rights of sexual minorities, let's see the track record. Ukraine offers no legal recognition of same-sex couples, no meaningful anti-discrimination laws, and no protection against hate crimes. So even the very progressive Rainbow Europe Index from 2024 ranks Ukraine 14th out of 49 countries in Europe, far below Hungary, Poland, and any other European country. But once again, Brussels says nothing, because when it comes to Ukraine, there are no principles, only ideology. There is a demand for European accession to the European Union. But in the end, the people who are going to pay for it is going to be the ordinary European citizens who can only blame the political elites in Brussels for not being properly prepared for Ukrainian enlargement. Our European voters will ask us, who are going to pay for this? What happens to our common rules and what happens to our voice? So let us be crystal clear here. This is not enlargement, this is a fantasy expansion. Ukraine is not ready for EU membership, and EU is not nearly ready to allow Ukraine to enter. Not now, not like this. This has nothing to do with being anti-Ukrainian. This has to do with speaking the truth and protecting Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vistisen, for this very clear speech. And now we'll hear from Soma Lehotzky from the Századvég Foundation, which will speak about the impact on cohesion policy and the structural funds. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's working. Honorable members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. My topic today is the effect of the EU accession of Ukraine and notably how this could impact the MFF budget related to regional development, the common agriculture policy and the cohesion funds. Now I am in the lucky position that the speaker before me have already used various angles to describe this topic, so I can focus on a bit more different things. So before addressing this exact topic, we must also have to acknowledge the economic environment currently shaping the present and the foreseeable future of our continent. As I see, there are three major issues to consider. One, the worsening global competitiveness, notably of the European continent. Two, the lack of fiscal space at core EU member states. And three, social tensions that have also, of course, societal impact, but have major macroeconomic consequences and considerations as well. And I would like to focus on the first one because I think this is one that is crucially connected to the topic of today. And you can look at it from various angles, but my main consideration would be energy policy. As we all know, energy is the bedrock of all modern industrialized economies, notably all European economies. And it is used by households and firms. It's priced directly or through pass-through mechanisms in the consumer basket effect, influence end-user prices and inflation. And Europe has an energy price problem. According to the well-known and much cited Draghi report, the EU's own research, the EU electricity prices are 2 to 3 times that of the US and China. And in terms of gas prices, they are 3 to 5 times that of the US and China. Now, in terms of the US, this is understandable because the United States is a net exporter of energy, therefore they use their own domestic resources. But China is also a huge importer, as the EU is. So this is much more complicated. This hurts manufacturers, decrease spending power of households, therefore decrease domestic consumption. And coupled with supporting industrial policies in competing regions such as the US, China, Japan, or India, leads to the deindustrialization of Europe and the hollowing of the core industrial manufacturing base of the European heartland. Energy prices are crucial, therefore, because they can define the action space of an economy and the policymakers. In this context, the accession of a low-income, war-torn country such as Ukraine would have dire consequences. Putting into perspective, in 2021, so right before the escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian war, Ukrainian development measured in purchasing power parity, so international dollar adjusted for consuming capabilities, was around $17,800. Now, in comparison, the EU average at the time was $52,000. and the Eurozone was a bit above that, $54,000. The least developed European country, if you can say that, Bulgaria, was at $31,000. So based on these data, you can see that there is not just a gap. There is a huge difference between the development of these regions. Now, based on this measure, as it was said earlier, Ukraine would be entitled to significant portions of the MMF development and cohesion funds. The EP, or the European Council, has established a report in the beginning of 2025, I believe. They estimated a conservative 11 to 20 billion euro additional expenditure per year, just for the Ukraine. Another issue that is key is the redistribution of the current common agricultural policy and the cohesion policy funds. We estimated, based on this Council report as well as other European Parliament material, and regarding both programs, Ukraine could be entitled to get, based on the 2021-2027 MMF, around 13 billion annually just for these two programs. Now, this would mean, noting that Ukraine has over 41 million hectares of agricultural land, mean that it would receive more than France, which is currently the #1 based on the area-based financial vehicles of the Common Agricultural Policy. Finally, another important consideration is the rebuilding of the destroyed infrastructure. The EU, the World Bank, the United Nations, and the Ukrainian government jointly estimate the war-torn country, that the war-torn country would need around $524 billion. This is, in perspective, close to 1/3 of the Spanish GDP, to rebuild the country, energy infrastructure, roads, transportation systems, and dwellings mostly. As Ukraine is incapable of financing this or borrowing from international or financial markets because it is impractically in default, for now, based on the current geopolitical situation, would also be done at the expense of the European taxpayers. There are many other topics, such as the increasing cost of financing for EU countries, as debts are used to rebuild Ukraine, and this would carve out additional financing from countries that need external financing, such as the Balkan countries, Greece, Italy, Spain, France, notably. And it could also raise social transfer expenditures as new waves of immigrants from the war-torn country. They are needing to be rebuilt. These all pose certain risks, but my main conclusion would be this. With the cost of the ongoing European rearmament, energy investments in our own electricity grid in order to maintain it and prepare it to the 21st century, the need to adjust fiscal space in many European countries, the continent simply cannot afford a financial liability of the size of Ukraine. It should rather focus on strengthening economic resilience, notably by driving down energy prices and catching up to peer competitors such as the US and China on the global scale of competition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this speech. Now that we have seen how the integration of Ukraine in the European Union could endanger the European budget, we will focus more on one huge topic and one hot topic right now in the European Union, which is the question of agriculture and how the Ukrainian agriculture could endanger the European farmers. For this, our first speaker will be Tomas Kubín, MEP from ANO Party from Czech Republic, who will speak about how the Ukrainian farmers will put European farmers in danger, especially because of unequal standards and foreign corporation intervention in Ukrainian agriculture. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, It's an honor to speak at this conference for the first time, the Patriots for the Nation. I'm happy to be here. And to open a topic that carries the title, which was said already, an uneven playing field, unequal standards, and foreign corporations in Ukrainian agriculture. Why I choose two topics? Because I would like to show you that something can be changed in the relationship to the Ukraine and the EU. Something cannot be changed, and you will see. Ukraine's accession to the European Union is for many a symbol of solidarity, of shared security, and of geopolitical orientation. All of this is true and should not be denied. Yet, at the same time, we must also say Ukraine accession to EU is not only a question of geopolitics, it's also a question of compatibility with European economics and legal framework. And nowhere is this question more visible than in agriculture. The first part, which I would like to speak about, is for some of you, most of the colleagues from the Agriculture Committee, well known. It means unequal standards. Ukraine has moved, let's say, relatively far in aligning with the EU acquis, but practical implementation lags and key gaps remains. So let's take, for example, a look at the food safety. EU hygiene laws are transposed partially, but enforcement is uneven, especially in SMEs. Official controls, labs, and so on are not operational. Incidents with pesticide residues illustrate the risks very well. Another point, animal health and welfare. Registration and traceability of animals remain incomplete. Disease surveillance needs stronger IT and labs. Welfare standards for hens, broilers, and pigs are totally below EU minima. The transition plans are requiring major investments. In the EU, origin labeling and animal welfare standards are mandatory. In Ukraine, these mechanisms are weak or totally absent. Products can therefore be cheaper, but at lower standards. Then GMOs. Highly discussed and interesting topic. Formal restrictions exist in Ukraine, but illicit cultivation, for example, soya beans, expose gaps in supervision. Probably the most important point is about environmental standards. Today, an EU farmer must comply with conditionality rules, crop rotation, soil protection against erosion, obligatory non-productive areas. The use of pesticides and fertilizers is strictly regulated, and so on. There are nitrates, water, air, waste, nature directives. Ukrainian farmer faces no such rules. In fact, substances banned in the EU for health and environmental reasons are still commonly used in Ukraine. That means lower production costs, but at the expense of fair competition. And the same thing is about social standards. An EU farmer pays workers under labor law, respects minimum wages, workplace safety, trade unions. In Ukraine, informal labor is widespread. Seasonal workers often, or probably never, have no contracts, and low labor rights are poorly enforced. This is called social dumping, my friends. This is a very problematic thing. I can give you many examples of products which are going on the corner of this topic, like, I don't know, honey, poultry, and so on, but it's not, we have not time for it. And the second part, that's what I would like to speak about, is probably not so well known for majority of you. The basic condition for any country accession to the EU is its compatibility, or at least the outlook of achieving compatibility with EU. What I have discussed so far may change for the better at some point, hopefully. But in the next part of my speech, I would like to point out something that is not compatible and, in my opinion, never will be. And it's about the structure of the ownership of the Ukrainian agriculture. We keep hearing that we must help Ukrainian agriculture because of the war. We need to help the farmers. But who are these Ukrainian farmers? Average farm size in the EU is 17 hectares. In Ukraine, however, agro-holdings operate tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of hectares. That it's not the same sport. It's a completely different game. EU Common Agriculture Policy, CAP or CAP, rests on the two pillars, direct payments and rural development. The aim is to balance conditions, protect small and medium-sized farmers and support public goods such as landscape protection and the social dimension of rural life. The recent reforms, which are now prepared, have further emphasized support for small farmers. Direct payments are increasingly distributed with debates on capping payments for large farms. And the new CAP from 2028 onwards will go even further, strengthening support for small producers, addressing generational renewal, sustainability, climate, and so on and so on. The direction can be described like less for the big, more for the small, but you know, it's like something in the middle. And now let us look at the Ukraine. What does reality show about the Ukrainian model? Land ownership. In recent years, and especially during the war, but not because of the war, there has been a massive transfer of land into the hands of oligarchs and foreign funds. Local farmers have lost land, often under very questionable circumstances. Non-transparent ownership structures, sometimes via offshore tax havens, are absolutely common. There is a dominance of agro-holding. A few major players like Kernel, MHP, Nibulon, and others control key commodities from grain to poultry. Their influence reaches beyond the economy into the politics. That's something that colleagues spoke about already. Small farmers are practically unsupported. There is no system of payments, no social instruments, no rural policy. Smallholders are marginalized with no chance to compete. Ukraine is a huge country, has 33 million hectares of arable land. I think we call it some like a breadbasket of the Europe, some of the most fertile in the world. The key question is who controls the Ukrainian agricultural land. Privatization and corruption since the 1990s have led to a huge concentration of land in the hands of oligarchs and foreign investors. There are 4.5 approximately million hectares in large-scale agriculture, of which 3 million hectares are controlled by just a couple of companies. 5 million hectares, by the way, have been stolen from the state, plundered, really plundered by private interests. In total, foreign funds, oligarchs, holdings control more than 9 million hectares. It's about a third of arable land in the Ukraine. The rest is, by the way, used by approximately 8 million small farmers. Just to give you an idea, a few of the top companies. We have the Kernel Holding, which is now at about 600,000 hectares and are aiming to achieve 700,000 hectares, based, by the way, in Luxembourg. It's the largest producer and exporter of sunflower oil. Then we have Land Farming, 400,000 hectares, Cyprus, grain, eggs, milk, meat, and so on. We have MHP, almost 400,000 hectares, Cyprus, chicken meat. DNA Corporate Solution, 300,000 hectares, USA. Another company, almost 300,000 from USA, NCH Capital. There are holdings from Saudi Arabia Investigation Fund, and so on and so on. Who are the investors behind it? There are the very well-known names like Vanguard, Goldman Sachs, BNP, Norges Bank, it's a Norwegian oil fund, many American pension funds, and by the way, also university foundations. And who are giving them the money? The creditors are EBRD, it means European Bank, EIB, European Bank, World Bank, ING, Raiffeisen, Deutsche Bank, and so on and so on and so on. just 6 of those largest companies have received loans totaling over $2 billion in recent years, because the number is rising. I have the last number, about 1.8. It was from as a couple 1 year ago. How it happened? There was some moratorium on land sales in Ukraine in between 2001 and 2021. It was like you can't buy the state-owned land and so on and so on. But it was lifted under the pressure from the International Money Fund, World Bank, and European Bank, EBRD. In 2020, during the COVID closure, was opened the land market, and from 2024, legal entities can buy up to 10,000 hectares. These reforms were conditioned. It was not their idea, probably was, but it was conditioned from IMF and from World Bank because of the loans. It was conditioned to do this. And what meant the public, the Ukrainian people? 64% of public was in opposition. The law was passed during the pandemic lockdowns, just so. It's Ukraine. Land concentration continues to increase. Kernel plans to grow to 700,000, which I said already, and so on. Small farmers, although they produce most of the food for the domestic markets, like 99%, maybe 100% of potatoes, 90% vegetables, milk, and so on, they receive minimal support. When you compare to the number which I said already, I mean $2 billion in the loans, then the World Bank has allocated only $5.4 million to them. It's just a small part. Not even the problem which industrial agriculture is bringing with it, like monocultures and so on. So, summary, over 9 million hectares of arable land are controlled by foreign and domestic investors, mostly registered in tax havens. And what's worse, Western-backed loans are giving control to the creditors. Debts are used to push privatization. Privatization in quotes, please. This is not just a different model, it's a model that's utterly incompatible with the European CAP. The future CAP will push even harder on capping big farms and supporting small ones. Ukraine, by contrast, moves in the opposite direction. Foreign corporate-controlled agro-holdings, minimal protection for the small. The current trend is towards further concentration of land, and international institutions like IMF, World Bank, EBRD are reinforcing this model through their policies and loans. If this current model will be allowed to go into the single market of EU without harmonization, the outcome will be clear. Small and medium EU farmers would face even greater pressures than they do today. And the protests we now see, or we saw in France, in Poland, or here in Brussels, would look modest compared to what might follow. There are political and economic consequences. The problem is if the European farmers see that they are required to meet this critical and stricter ecological and social rules, while Ukrainian production enters the market with lower standards and dumping prices, the sense of injustice will provoke massive frustrations. It will be about the liquidation of SME farms and political tensions, and it can lead to the destabilization of the European integration project itself. So I'm by the conclusion. No one denies that Ukraine deserves a European perspective and that our solidarity is necessary. But we must also say clearly the European Union must not sacrifice its agriculture policy on the altar of geopolitics. That's the main message. If Ukraine accession to it's to be fair and sustainable, the rules must be first be harmonized. Land ownership must be transparent, and so on and so on. Otherwise, we will not have a level playing field. We will have a field on which the game can not even be played. So let me end with a clear message. Solidarity with Ukraine, yes, but fair, balanced, and with respect for our European model of agriculture. Accession to the CAP requires harmonization, otherwise we risk destroying the very foundation of Europe's agriculture policy. And finally, my summary, I must repeat that many things can be reformed and changed in Ukraine, such as various necessary standards, for example. What will definitively not change and what will, on the contrary, move in an unwanted direction is the ownership structure and significant part of Ukraine agriculture. So if you ask me whether I see any moment in the future of Ukraine accession to the EU begin with a win-win situation for both sides, EU and Ukraine, in the field of agriculture and not dangerous for all farmers, then my answer is clearly no, never. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubín. Now we will focus on two countries which are particularly attacked and threatened by the possible accession of Ukraine to the European Union. The first one is France. Gilles Pennelle, member of European Parliament for the Rassemblement National, will speak about how Ukraine could put the common agricultural policy under pressure and how it could be a threat for French agriculture. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Merci à vous. Je vais m'exprimer en français, peut-être répéter.
Thank you very much indeed. I will speak in French. I may repeat some of the things that have been said already. And first and foremost, I would like to tell you that before even the entering of Ukraine, there is already an impact on the common agricultural policy, and the Commission is already behaving with Ukraine as if it were already a member of the European Union. We know that this is an agricultural giant, and only Stalin could make millions of Ukrainians die of famine in the 1930s, because when we know Ukraine, we all know the black lands of Ukraine, which are very fertile and very good for crops. But let me give you a figure to understand the volume, the major volume of Ukraine in agriculture. 24% of the total agricultural area of the European continent, 24% of the total surface. Our colleague Kubín demonstrated and explained very well those gigantic structures in Ukraine. This is a major producer, and of course there would be a big impact on France, and there is already an impact on France. 33 million of tons of wheat is already produced by Ukraine. Well, that was before the war, but it does not necessarily go down with the war, and France only produces 25 million of tons. Now, maize, 42 million of tons of maize are produced per year by Ukraine, 15 million by France, and 50% of total Ukrainian exports are agricultural products, which means that today Ukraine is already a giant agricultural actor and a big exporting power. There are already major competition distortions. For example, cost of labor. If we take the monthly gross salary, 1,800 euros in France, but in the Ukraine, 155 euros, and we know the importance of wage earners in farm holdings. This is an unbelievable difference. The minimum wage, the lowest in Europe is Bulgaria, 551 euros compared to 155 euros in Ukraine. So you can't compete with such a difference in wages. Then the size of farms, we've already discussed it, 61 hectares in average in France, 1,000 hectares in Ukraine. But this figure of 1,000 hectares doesn't mean anything, because 21% of the agricultural area in Ukraine as farms between 10,000 and 50,000 hectares, and some are even bigger, under the hands of oligarchs and foreign investors. GMOs are authorized. Plant protection products are also largely, broadly authorized. There is no rules. Farms in poultry farming, for example. In the Agri Committee, we are told that we must show solidarity with agricultural Ukrainian farmers. But 80% of poultry produced in Ukraine is controlled by MHP and from under the hands of the Maltese oligarch Kossuth, which is listed on the London market. So no solidarity is possible with small Ukrainian farmers. There are also, of course, small Ukrainian farmers, but if we support Ukraine, we are going to be supporting oligarchs, and they are already exporting huge amounts of poultry on the European market. So what we must know is that before letting Ukraine into the EU, there is already a negotiation of major import of Ukrainian products in Europe. On 19th of May 2022, the European Parliament adopted a liberalization regulation on industrial products, on fruit and vegetables, and on agricultural products. The MEPs of the ID group at the time voted against, of course. But these volumes are going to be huge, and this is going to be, and it was reenacted in 2023, and then the Commission adopted emergency brakes. That means that it reduced their imports for a bit in 2024, but also implemented an association contract with Ukraine. And I'm going to give you some figures to show you the impact of the current existing imports and the damages of Ukrainian imports on our agriculture and on French agriculture. Sugar, for example, and this morning I met the representatives of the sugar sector in France and in Europe, and they're very concerned. And there's Mercosur, of course, but their main problem, despite of this, is Ukraine. Before the war, we used to import 20,000 tons of sugar from Ukraine. Since 2023, 400,000 tons of sugar per year are imported. With the emergency brake imposed by the Commission in 2024, we went down to 260,000 tons. So now we are going to make sustainable each year before adherence of Ukraine these huge amounts of sugar, which are going to destroy the European sugar industry. And the price of beets in Europe is going down, and we were told this morning that many beet producers in France are going to stop production of beets to do something else because they can't compete with such a competition. Now, in chicken meat, before war, 90,000 tons yearly of chicken, now 230,000 tons of chicken. And I'm not even going to tell you about the quality of this chicken that we have in our preparation food coming from Ukraine. But as there is no origin labeling in meat, we don't know that we eat this very dirty Ukrainian chicken. 90,000 tons before the war, 230 tons in 2023, and now 140,000 tons because of the emergency brake, but this remains considerable. Now, I could tell you about the wheat, about eggs. This summer there was a scandal on eggs in France. in retailing. Leclerc was selling eggs at very low prices. These eggs were of very low quality coming from Ukraine. Let me draw your attention on other agricultural topic we talk a lot about in the Agri Committee, but not in the public debate, whereas this is key for our sovereignty. The issue of seeds. France is a world leader in the production of seeds for plants, for vegetables, for fruit, and so forth. So today, the European Commission has adopted several decisions to increase sharply imports of Ukrainian seeds, but also from Moldavia. Let me give you some figures on cereal seeds. Before the war, we imported 680 quintal of cereal seeds, whereas in 2022 we increased to 9,000 quintal, and now we are at 120,000 tons quintal only for wheat in the EU. So now there is a pairing system. We recognize the quality of those seeds. Then the European Commission negotiated in 2022 on beet seeds, on colza seed, and in 2024 it got a liberalization of trade on soy seeds. So to be clear, we are killing the seeds sector, and seeds are about input. We have already lost sovereignty on fertilizers, and now in France and in Europe we are about to lose sovereignty on seeds, which is in a way upstream of the agricultural process. And Ukraine is pouring down their seeds, and the next Agri Committee, I suppose, is going to give the green light to other imports of seeds. And this is very serious indeed for France, because this is a leader on the seeds market. 11,000 employments in France, 370,000 hectares of land to cultivate seeds, and we are about to kill the seed sector already now, before even letting Ukraine in the EU. And then, of course, there is the issue of the CAP, and we've discussed it. You've discussed it already. And this is going to be a disaster, a bomb. The CAP is a cake cut in slices, and each EU country have their own slices. But first of all, Mrs. von der Leyen announced in July, and we did not really discuss it because this was during the holiday, a reduction of 24% of the next CAP, which means that in the next CAP 2028-2034 will be reduced by 24%. So you have my cake, and this cake is going to be reduced in size. And I'm just taking a very easy to understand image. All farmers in the EU are going to receive less direct support. And if Ukraine gets in the EU, there is going to be another guest at the table who is going to take their share of this already smaller cake. And this new country around the table has a very strong appetite with a very large agriculture, which means that they are going to get more CAP credits than France. We often hear that France gets the lion's share of the CAP, which was maybe the case in early CAP in the 1960s or 70s, but now Ukraine would get it all. Let me give you an interesting figure. If today Ukraine was to exceed the EU, this would lead to a 20% decrease of direct support of CAP for all European farmers. How can we be okay with this. And this is what we have to explain our farmers, the sectors, the trade unions, and they have understood it already. I questions the Commissioner for Agriculture answer on this future bomb, and told me that if Ukraine was to exceed the EU, he told me, well, you are partly right, the rules of the current CAP would not work. But what does it mean? It means, to put it very plainly, as we already had with the announcement of von der Leyen in July, this would be the disappearance of the common agricultural policy. And Madame von der Leyen announced that the CAP budget would be integrated in the global budget of the EU. So it could be used also, for example, to fund war. So that would mean the end of the CAP.
Ne pourra pas augmenter.
As the budget of the European Union could not be reduced, the adherence of Ukraine would simply speed up the end of the CAP and the end of the European Union. Adding on a country to the European Union with the rules that we have to abide by today would mean the end of the European Union, but they are just laughing it off. And when you talk about those figures during the agri meetings, they just answer, yes, but you have to be in solidarity with Ukraine. So you are not in rational thinking, you are just talking ideology. They just do not want to be faced with the figures. They don't want to accept those figures because we are in the rule of ideology. And of course, when we show those figures, we are being told that we are supporters of Putin, that we are monsters, and so on. So there is this whole strategy that is going on, but you have seen that as well with the Mercosur situation. You are being answered that yes, so basically the European Union got some percentages, some advantages, and so on. But that's not the case. When you talk to farmers in my region, for example, in the beetroot region or the poultry region, they see Ukraine as being the biggest threat for Europe, for the European agriculture. And today, and we'll show you this through a couple of figures, before even talking about the adhesion of Ukraine to the European Union, there is already a policy that is in place for Ukraine, which means that they are practically already member states of the European Union. And this is what I try to show you. This policy versus Ukraine that is being supported by some of the groups here in the parliament. Well, these policies are proof that agriculture is not a priority of the European Union anymore, even though it was at the very beginning of the European Union. You know that one of the first policies of the European Union was the CAP, but today it is not a priority anymore. And our European technocrats, helped by blind politicians, are simply just sacrificing agriculture. So we have to fight with all our strength to all these things. This increase that I talked to you about, 100,000 tons of sugar, for example, this is an increase that we are going to see every year. There is going to be 180,000 tons of sugar that is going to be provided by the Mercosur agreement. We are simply killing our agriculture. And I doubt that the people who are so tough with our farmers are going to stay the same with Mercosur or with Ukraine. So we have to fight alongside our farmers. This is a European solidarity that we have to abide with. Even if France, that is one of the biggest agricultural powers of the European Union, is already impacted by those measures, we still have to fight those fatal measures now and in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Gilles Pennelle, to show us that the crisis is not near. It is already there. It is already now. It's already real. And there is one country which understood it. It's Poland, in which for many years now, there is huge demonstration, huge movement from the Polish farmers against this threat linked with Ukrainian agriculture. So now Kacper Kita, leading expert for Konfederacja, our allies in the European Parliament, will speak about this topic and how Polish agriculture is now under pressure because of this risk of Ukraine accession to the EU. Mr. Kita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci, Raphael. Thanks for having me, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with you today and share a Polish perspective on this issue that is absolutely crucial to all Europe, but perhaps particularly to us, Poland, as a close neighbor of Ukraine. C'est un grand plaisir d'être avec vous et pouvoir échanger sur les expériences de nos
It is a great pleasure for us to share our knowledge and protect our common interests.
Kubín and Monsieur Pennelle said there's not that much to add on Ukrainian agriculture, but I will try to share with you some particular Polish points on all of this. As it's some particularities, because as it's widely known, Europe has been very helpful to Ukraine during the last 3.5 years. But Poland was certainly at the forefront of this effort. Poland devoted the largest percentage of its GDP, according to the Gilles Institute, of all countries in the world to helping Ukraine since the Russian invasion. This meant both military help and aiding refugees fleeing war, with not just government action, but also millions of ordinary Poles engaging in various ways in helping Ukrainians when their country was attacked. However, we must not throw the baby with the bathwater. We have to carefully distinguish helping Ukraine survive as an independent country from acting counter to our basic national and European long-term economic interests. And this is obviously especially true in the agricultural sector. And we have certainly seen during these last 3 years how this has been the most important area of tensions between Warsaw and Kiev, because obviously we have seen that our interests are more and more divergent, and also that Ukrainian government is very determined to use this situation to their advantage, also collaborating closely with European Commission and basically the liberal technocratic establishment against other national capitals, even those who used to be the most friendly towards them. And this has been a crucial reason in the cooling of our bilateral relationship and in the cooling of Polish societal attitude towards Ukraine. Polish farmers have been suffering from the liberalization of trade with Ukraine ever since 2022. They have started big protests at the beginning of 2023, exerting pressure on the government to act. And we have then seen how Ukrainian government was very quick to go to European Commission and try to impose its policies on Poland, overcoming bilateral level and accusing even Polish government, even the then Polish government, of being pro-Russian, pro-Putin, etc. It was obviously absurd, and all of you here, our French, Italian, Hungarian friends who have been discussing, I would say, with Poles' Russia policy for decades know how absurd it is to accuse Polish government of being pro-Russian, but nevertheless, this was what happened with Mr. Zelensky. Polish farmers felt abandoned by the very hasty opening of the market, which proved really very dangerous in various sectors. Overnight, they faced fierce and unfair competition that posed and still poses an existential threat to their survival. Consequently, it is dangerous both to our current prosperity and to our long-term food security and self-sufficiency, which cannot be sacrificed by simply moralistic and often simply false arguments. As a big, neighboring and agrarian country, we have been primarily affected, but the same risks are shared by all EU countries. As it's already been said by Mr. Kubín, Ukraine's agricultural area arable land is 33 million hectares. Agricultural area is approximately 41 million hectares. and this constitutes 27% of the total area of arable land in Europe. So it's a really, really very big chunk in our whole continent. And we have to remember these are some of the most, if not the most, fertile soils in the whole world. And at the same time, they are not affected by all the EU rules and restrictions. So we have a sort of a strange in-between state in which Ukraine benefits from parts of being sort of a half member of European Union, having access to the single market, etc., but at the same time, not being affected by the costs and the rules that apply to all member countries. And this is a very dangerous situation, especially since Polish agriculture is largely composed of small or medium-sized family and local farms, and such decent, hard-working people form the healthy basis of our economy and our society. They are the salt of the earth, and on the other side in Ukraine, as has already been said, you have giant land holdings who mostly belong either to Ukrainian oligarchs or to foreign investment funds, who are often registered in tax havens or simply American. So we have normal family farms or medium-sized companies who have obviously very little chance of winning with such rivals, who can produce on an immensely larger scale, and who also have structural support of the European Commission. And once again here we can see the systemic weakness of EU institutions, which theoretically should defend Europeans, but in practice allow external actors and international globalist uprooted capital to brutally destroy the prosperity and property of Europeans, often generated over generations. And we will become subjugated on a very fundamental level if we are no longer capable of producing our own food. It's really ridiculous when the same people speak about strategic autonomy while they are destroying our most basic autonomy, our autonomy in creating our own food. But what else could be expected from Madame von der Leyen, looking at her successes with negotiations with America or negotiations on Mercosur? By the way, it's also quite ridiculous to think that by making some oligarch with a company registered in Cyprus or Cayman Islands richer, we will actually help Ukraine deter Russia on the military front. These are two very different topics that should not be treated as if they are the same thing. And this has also been perceived very much so in Poland, with helping Ukraine militarily being much less controversial than opening our market to agricultural products. But the attitude of the Ukrainian government has also made Poles more skeptical towards Ukraine in general. Because we have to remember that we perceive Ukraine, we Europe, mostly through the lens of the ongoing war, and rightly so, since the conflict is obviously a serious danger to all of us. And Ukraine is obviously in a very difficult situation, losing thousands of people killed in the war or fleeing the country. But it would be a grave mistake if we therefore tacitly assumed that the Ukrainian economy is also in tatters and underestimated the abilities of Ukrainian companies. Because Ukraine's agriculture sector has shown an incredible capacity to rapidly increase exports despite the war. And this can obviously destabilize the European internal market. Ukraine's agriculture has also shown great adaptability. For example, they have greatly increased sugar exports. In 2023, Ukraine exported almost 500,000 tons of sugar to the EU, and this is 23-fold increase compared to the 2016-2021 average. And sugar prices in Poland have fallen by approximately 40% over the past dozen or so months, which obviously made for a lot of Polish farmers concentrated on this field, their work losing value, and many of them risk either going out of business or, for example, becoming indebted because what they have been doing for years is suddenly not capable of giving them the necessary resources of survival. Or another example, in the first half of 2025, Ukraine exported 64,000 tons of chicken eggs to Europe. This is 96% more than in the entire previous years. And in financial terms, their gains from the exports increased by as much as 160%. Or another example, just a few days ago, MHP, a leader in the poultry industry in Ukraine, acquired 92% of the share capital of Grupo Uvesa, a major Spanish poultry and pork producer that has been building a fully integrated production model for years. So MHP has basically assumed management control of this major Spanish company. So you see that theoretically we have a Western European country that's been in Europe for decades, and we have a country at war, but the country at war is capable of taking over not only markets, but also Western European companies. And this is seriously endangers the interests of the Polish poultry industry. Poland is the biggest poultry producer in the European Union, but not only Polish, obviously. And for several years now, MHP has been building its position in the EU, enabling the distribution of meat from Ukraine, which does not have to meet all the expensive requirements that are enforced in the EU, environmental, welfare requirements, etc., while obviously being a danger to all meat producers in EU, which is very obviously not fair competition. Even President Macron criticized MHP last year and said that making 1 billionaire richer doesn't help Ukraine. But nevertheless, and this once again shows how helpless are current European leaders. You know, we still have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development just in June 2025 provided MHP with a further 40 million euros to increase energy security and diversify production. Yesterday we have President Sarkozy in Le Figaro also saying that Mercosur is even a lesser danger than Ukraine agriculture policy. But, the same people who have a long track record in saying things but not delivering are pretending that they want to protect European agriculture while not acting seriously and subsidizing even oligarchs, and which obviously has nothing to do with actually helping Ukraine in the way as it is presented. According to an investigation by investigative journalist website Follow the Money, the same company received multi-million loans from the EU, which were theoretically intended to support Ukraine's agricultural sector, despite criticism of its inadequate oversight of environmental and animal welfare standards. But it's not just farmers. We have a lot of industries. For example, another industry in Poland that protested the most against the liberalization of trade with Ukraine is transport industry. We have had an influx of Ukrainians in transport industry without necessary permits, and no analogous advantages to Polish drivers on the other side. And for example, as one of the leaders of Polish truckers, Rafał Meckler, said, EU representatives laughed at us during one of these discussions and simply said, some industries are going to collapse, that's normal in the economy. But, it's ridiculous. It's not a free market economy with such big structural disadvantages and such big engagement of the European Commission and also of big international capital, international investment funds, etc. And on the other hand, you have family companies, family farms from Poland, France, and other countries. It's ridiculous. And for example, in the first months of this year, imports of steel from Ukraine to Poland quadrupled. Ukrainian steel free from climate restrictions is now sold below production cost in Polish that we have in Polish steel mills. So once again, Polish producers are rapidly losing market share and their chances of survival. So it's another important sector. And, obviously Ukrainian producers are not burdened by the ETS system, environmental restrictions, production standards, etc. At the same time, low labor force, it's not a good model for Polish economy in the long term. We want to, as we have become much richer during the last 30 years, it's not good for us in the long term to simply stay as a country that's not innovative, that's not developing its own companies, but is just penetrated by foreign capital and foreign low-cost labor force. But this is the model that the European Commission wants for us. So Ukrainian government is working in the same direction, which is also in the long term dangerous for us. And the final factor we have to take into account is that the Ukrainian government persistently prefers to develop its ties with the European Commission and the technocratic establishment. despite many pro-Ukrainian actions on the part of subsequent Polish governments over the years. And this shows us that if Ukraine would become a EU member state, probably it would be even harder to reverse the tide of eroding the sovereignty of the nation states, therefore making it even easier to impose various destructive policies on our economies, on normal, hardworking peoples in our country, such as farmers in Poland and other countries. And we also have to take into account, this is our Polish experience, how deeply Ukrainian elites are penetrated and mutually intertwined with German liberal leftist foundations and institutions, who have for many years been developing with money, with the networking, very deep ties with Ukrainian elites, making them dependent on them. And, both the previous Polish center-right government and the current Polish center-left government have been criticized inside Poland as too lenient on Ukraine and Ukrainians, most notably by Konfederacja, which increased its support over twice during the last 2 years because of that, partially because of that, but it was a very important factor. And this attitude is now widely shared by Polish society, and even politicians from the two main parties are now being forced to adapt their discourse, their actions to these trends, as is the case with our newly elected Conservative president, who just 2 weeks ago vetoed a bill extending some social benefits for Ukrainians living in Poland, and who in their last election in June this year got 80% of votes of farmers in the razor-thin second round of the election. So this also shows you how the farmer vote can be crucial in European politics, making one politician win or lose, and how politicians can be forced to deliver on these crucial issues. Because you also have to remember that that these are two different issues. The issue of, or perhaps even 3 different issues. The military, geopolitical issue, the issue of economical relations, and another issue is Ukrainian immigrants and refugees living in Europe. But paradoxically, because of the actions of the Ukrainian government and the European Commission, these issues become intertwined, and I think that this can be detrimental to the own interest in the long term, because they are producing resentment against themselves, even in countries that used to be more friendly towards them, because of these structural conflicts and not wanting to find a good compromise. But again, as it was already said, we will not be able to find a compromise with big agro holdings it's very obvious that they will simply want to eat up our European internal market. And the mobilization of the Polish farmers during these last few years has been a crucial factor in forcing the entire Polish political class to adopt a more pragmatic attitude, and it will not go away because Polish farmers do not want to die out like dinosaurs, like some would want to tell them, and it's the same for Polish steel workers, Polish truckers, etc. And these areas of tension, there are too many of them to simply fade away because of arrogance of some European leaders. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all the best in your work towards protecting European interests in this very crucial matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kita, and thank you to all of our speakers for this very interesting speech and debate. I hope that it helped all of you to understand better the situation and why this question of the Ukraine accession to the EU matter and is important for all Europe, and especially for the European farmers. Now we will have a conclusion by our president, Mr. András László, president of the Patriots for Europe Foundation and MEP for Fidesz.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of our panelists. I think we heard very interesting insights, and thank you for putting me in a situation where you confirmed what I said you would do, that you would bring a lot of numbers about Ukraine's EU membership into this discussion. It is something which is unfortunately a very ideological, very dogmatic discussion in the media, in policy debates. I'm very happy that it is the Patriots for Europe Foundation which was able to host such an event where we could put forward the figures. And of course, not only the figures were put forward, a lot of emotions were also put forward, which I believe is completely adequate in consideration of the gravity of the situation, the gravity of a decision which would be made to allow, as we have heard also, access to EU markets of Ukrainian products, even without EU membership of Ukraine. This is an issue which, of course, came to the front last year, especially on in the agricultural sector. But as we've heard today, it would very severely impact European budgets. It would very severely impact hundreds of thousands of farmers, millions of farmers across the EU, and our entire food security and agricultural sector. I think we must have more future discussions like this, more future debates on this, because I don't see the European mainstream, thinking about this, considering what the real consequences are. We didn't see it when they opened the market in an unlimited manner to Ukrainian products. And we've heard also a glimpse into, beyond the EU budget and structural funds. We've heard beyond agriculture. We've heard about the steel industry. We've heard about the transport sector, etc. Indeed, this is a very, very grave matter which will determine the future of the European Union. And as unfortunately, I don't recall which of our panelists said, this may even break the European Union if done in an irresponsible way. I hope this is not where this is going. I hope Ukraine and the EU can cooperate as it is meant to be, on a win-win basis, as international cooperation should be, as EU membership should be based on, and on merit. Unfortunately, this is not the policy direction we see today, but this is something we Patriots will be fighting for. And I would like to thank our audiences as well. It's the first week of the European Parliament. I think this is a very heavy subject to start the fall session with. And very many of you, if I counted correctly, we were more than 60 today here in the room, with several MEPs attending also in the audiences. I think this also underlines how important this subject is, and that we must include even more people to our panels in the future on this subject. And I can promise you that we will continue on this subject. And talking about continuation, if you have any questions which you would have, and I'm sure you do, please join us at the reception, which starts at 7 o'clock, so in 20 minutes, where you will have an opportunity. I hope our panelists will also join us to ask some questions, to have further debates on this, to share your views from your countries, because this is a very important debate which many people don't want to have in Brussels, but this is now the chance. Again, thank you for participating, and thank you to each one of our panelists for coming and sharing your very valuable insights on this matter. Thank you very much.